Hello, I'm Alice Baxter with BBC World News. Our top story: relief efforts continue in Syria's old city of Homs. More food and medicines are brought in, more people are being evacuated. The BBC's Luz Doucet is there to witness the operation.
The buses are poised here, ready to go in, to take people who are desperate to leave what has been 18 months of siege.
Britain's on its highest alert as hurricane-force winds and torrential rain cause floods and widespread damage. We speak to the writer at the centre of a literary storm. Wendy Doniger tells us what she makes of the decision to destroy her book about the Hindu religion.
It should not be suppressed. It should be available to those who like it, and those who don't like it shouldn't read it.
And we look at the legal highs available over the internet, which are killing more and more people each year. A very warm welcome to you. Now, the city of Homs has become one of the symbols of the brutal civil war in Syria. People in the besieged city have been without any assistance for 18 months. Today, there was a small glimmer of hope. A small aid convoy with armoured vehicles bearing the UN's blue logo entered the old city. The governor of Homs has promised to keep a truce alive for as long as needed to get supplies in and civilians out of the old city. More than 1,100 people have been able to leave, but between 1,000 and 2,000 are still believed to be trapped inside. Well, our chief international correspondent, Luz Doucet, is in the old city, from where she sent this report earlier on Wednesday. So how are events in Homs being seen by the government and rebel sides? Edgar Jalad is the TV editor of our sister station, BBC Arabic. Jalad, how is it being viewed by both sides? Is it helping to make people in the region feel any safer? There's been this total breakdown of trust up until this point, hasn't there?
The short answer is partially yes, because this is an area that has been under siege for more than 18 months and people are struggling with their daily living. So by offering them these tiny bits of security or safety for some of them, and some food and aids entering the city or part of the city, this will help them. But this will not end the drama in Syria. This will not end the drama happening in other parts of Syria, in Aleppo and in the eastern part of the country.
So is there any possibility that this hiatus in the fighting, this ceasefire, could be extended into a wider long-term ceasefire and even potentially into some sort of a diplomatic solution for Homs?
Well, it's very difficult to reach a ceasefire that could cover the whole country for several reasons. The most important one is that the opposition is not in control of all the brigades fighting. So the government argument was always, who's going to make the decision, who's in control to give orders to these people, these fractions, to ceasefire, if we do it from our side. So, but on the other hand, the government wants to make security and the humanitarian issue on top of the list of priorities, changing it from being a political problem to a violence and humanitarian problem. And this is what's happening. We've noticed in the past 2 days an increase in the hostilities and the fightings in several areas. And we have received information this morning about strikes and attacks against Yabrud, which is a very strategic town in the western part of the country along the borders with Lebanon. So this means that the government is relying on increasing tension on a security level to make this the most important topic to be discussed tomorrow and the day after, when the Russians and the Americans are on the table.
In Geneva.
In Geneva.
Very interesting points. Again, many thanks, Edgar Jalad there from BBC Arabic, giving us his perspective on events unfolding in Homs and around Syria. OK, well, one other development from the Syrian conflict to bring you, and that is that police in the UK are investigating claims that a British man carried out a suicide bombing in Aleppo. Now, it's thought that Abdul Wahid Majid, who's 41, drove a truck full of explosives into the walls of Aleppo prison, which is under the control of the Syrian regime. If true, it would be the first such attack carried out by a British national for rebel forces. Now, Britain is in the grip of some of the worst flooding in decades, with another huge storm sweeping across the country. Winds in excess of 160 kilometres per hour are being recorded, and forecasters say that a month's worth of rain could fall in the next few days, much of it on areas which are already flooded following weeks of rainfall. Well, these pictures are from Lyme Regis on the southwest coast as the storm closes in. It's gale force 10 winds out to sea there. Officials have issued a red weather warning. That's the highest level of alert. Transport services are being disrupted and power supplies have been cut to tens of thousands of houses in Wales as the storm moves slowly eastwards. The Met Office has issued a red warning. That's its highest level of alert.
It's like somebody sticking needles in me.
This is when you're pleased to be inside a warm studio. Now, of course, the bad weather extends far beyond the British Isles because the southeast coast of the United States has been battered by a winter ice storm. Thousands of flights are cancelled and hundreds more delayed. Forecasters are warning that the worst of the storm is yet to come. Now, high-level face-to-face talks between North and South Korea are a rare event. So when Pyongyang asked for a meeting at short notice, the world started paying attention. Well, those discussions got underway on Wednesday at the buildings which straddle the ceasefire line. There's no official agenda, but the South will want to talk about families who remain separated by the demilitarized zone. And the North is almost certain to raise concerns about joint US-South Korean military exercises. And our correspondent in Seoul, Lucy Williamson, sent us this report. Now, more East Asian diplomacy in action in Japan, where the US ambassador, Caroline Kennedy, has made her first visit to the island of Okinawa, hoping to get support for a plan to relocate a US military base. Well, Japan and the US want to close Futenma Air Base and build a new one close to the more remote northern city of Nago. But many local residents want the base off Okinawa altogether. The US has 26,000 troops on the island under a long-standing security alliance with Japan. Now, the India branch of the publishing house of Penguin has agreed to recall and destroy all remaining copies of a book on Hinduism. Wendy Doniger's work, The Hindus and Alternative History, had been the subject of a legal challenge, claiming the text was offensive to Hindus. Well, it's heightened concerns over freedom of speech in India. Here's how Wendy Doniger responded to the claims when she appeared on BBC World News.
Penguin tried very hard. The law is very cruel, and it criminalizes a publisher for publishing a book that offends a Hindu. So it is the law that must be changed. Publishers, all publishers in India are subject to this law, and many of them simply drop the books the minute there's any trouble. It was wonderful of Penguin to fight as long as they did. A book is always a matter of opinion. If some people don't like it, that's fine. Some people like it. It's a strong book, so it's going to have people who love and people who hate it, but it should not be suppressed. It should be available to those who like it, and those who don't like it shouldn't read it. There's very, very little about sex in the whole book. It's an 800-page book. It's actually a very long, serious book about the history of Hinduism, and there's hardly any sex in it anywhere. It's madness. All of the claims are absolutely ludicrous.
The interview was first broadcast on our Impact programme, and on Thursday we hope to speak to the publishers, Penguin, about why they've taken this action, and that's from 1300 GMT on Thursday here on BBC World News. We'll also have more later on an emotional homecoming for the man from El Salvador who says he spent more than a year drifting at sea. This is BBC World News with me, Alice Baxter. The latest headlines. More residents have been evacuated from the Syrian city of Homs and food aid taken in to help alleviate some of the suffering there. The worst weather in decades batters part of Britain. Hurricane-force winds and torrential rain cause flooding and widespread damage. Now, the far-right party of France, the Front National, is gaining popularity if the latest opinion polls are to be believed. 1,000 French voters were surveyed by market researchers TNS Software, and 34% of them said that they now agree with the ideas of the Front National. Well, this compares with 22% who were surveyed in 2011. This was when Marine Le Pen took the leadership of the party. So the Front National is leading the polls for the upcoming European elections in May. Well, let's get more now from our correspondent, Christian Fraser, who's in Paris for us. Christian, in the past, you've described Marine Le Pen and her party as a bit of a paradox in terms of who they appeal to across France. What did you mean by that?
Well, I think if you look at this survey in the round, 60% of the people still say that they've never voted for the Front National, could never envisage voting for the Front National, and still a majority of people, majority of French voters, are opposed to the main economic policies that she's pushing, namely the stand against globalisation and the much vaunted policy to take France out of the EU. And yet, paradoxically, as you say, there is this issue that more and more people are swayed by the arguments of the FN. They feel Marine Le Pen is more in touch with the problems of French workers at the moment. And as you rightly point to those polls of the European elections coming up in May, it is the Front National that lead the way. The first time, incidentally, that they've led the poll for a national election. So certainly, I think support is growing for the Front National, and that will be a concern, of course, to the two mainstream parties.
And what could this mean for those European elections, for the EU as a whole? The Front National is a party, as you say, which seems bent on pulling France out of the bloc, and yet France is a country that really drove the Union in the first place, and by many people's standards is one of the main beneficiaries of the EU. So what will this do to Europe?
Well, I think there are lessons here for other countries, but there are a specific set of things that are happening in France which speak of the FN's growing popularity. I mean, the first thing, first and foremost, is the economy, of course. 11% record unemployment here, and youth unemployment in particular is growing. So when you look at how the vote split down at the presidential elections in 2012, a majority of the 18 to 24-year-olds voted for the Front National. They're disenfranchised with the two mainstream parties. So they've got to get to grips with that issue and speak more to young voters. The other issue is the leadership of the two main parties. We already know the problems of François Hollande. He's the most unpopular president of the Fifth Republic. The leadership of the UMP, and this is really the untold story in France at the moment, the right-wing UMP of the former president Nicolas Sarkozy is now under the leadership of Jean-François Copé. He doesn't seem to connect with the voters, and indeed he's languishing behind the Front National. And I think the final thing to say is to talk about the leadership itself. Marine Le Pen is a softer figure, in inverted commas, than her father was, Jean-Marie Le Pen. She's ditched the stigma of anti-Semitism, her words. They're not as overtly racist as they were. She was quite quiet on the issue of gay marriage. I think the problem for her going forward, just to finish, is that she's going to find it difficult to keep all these disparate elements in her party together. And I could see a scenario in the future where the party might even change its name.
Interesting times ahead, Christian. Many thanks for now. Christian Fraser there for us in Paris. Now, Palestinian housewife Ibtissam Erekat and Israeli Orthodox Jew Ruth Ebenstein share an unusual relationship. The two women met 3 years ago through the COPE Forum. That's a support group for breast cancer sufferers and survivors that draw in both Israelis and Palestinians and has led to strong relationships across the divide. Here's the story of two women from very different backgrounds facing the same problems. Known as legal highs, well, there are no laws stopping people buying the substances, usually over the internet, but most recent figures show that in 2012, nearly 70 people died from the drugs. Well, our global health correspondent, Tulip Mazumdar, is here. And Tulip, you've been looking at the figures, haven't you?
Yes, well, these were post-mortem results. The reporters looked at post-mortem results from around the country, and so-called legal highs or new psychoactive substances were identified as the main cause of death in 68 cases in 2012. That's up from just 10 cases in 2009. Now, these drugs are made specifically to mimic the effects of illegal drugs like cannabis, cocaine, LSD, but they're chemically different enough to sidestep the law, and that's why we see them being sold so openly online. In Britain, you can buy them on the high street. I've been speaking to one family that was very badly affected by this. Richard Phillips was 26 years old. He had a young family. He was doing well in his job in IT. He decided one day to take a now banned substance called N-bomb. He started fitting at this party, had several seizures, and he's now been left severely brain damaged. And this isn't, unfortunately, as uncommon as you would hope. We can probably hear now from his brother, Byron, who's been talking to me about what he's like now.
He's dependent on 24-hour care. He can hold his head up and move his arms, but that's about as far as it goes. I mean, he can't communicate. He would not have taken this if he knew the risks. I'm heartbroken that it was something that he could get so easily, that could have such a devastating effect.
Devastating story there. So how easy is it, Tulip, to get hold of these drugs? How widely available are they?
Well, it's very easily, frankly. I mean, I got these just the other day. I ordered them online at about 4 o'clock in the afternoon. They're at my front door at 7 o'clock the next morning. I should say, I mean, if you look at them, it says very clearly on the back, you know, novelty collector's item, not for human consumption. It says this one is a research chemical. This one is 1 gram of herbal incense. It says everywhere, do not take them. However, you know, there are limited other uses for things like this. You know, you are able to look at the back and see what's supposedly in them, but these are brand new substances. They haven't been tested. Nobody really knows what's in them. I mean, I actually got a few tested a little while back, and the toxicologist said, well, I can tell you the chemical formula of what's in here, but I can't tell you what it will do to you if you take it. I can't tell you anything about it, and that's really the problem here. People are ingesting these things, even though they're not supposed to be, even though it says on the packet don't, and they are ending up very sick because they are the guinea pigs trying this stuff for the first time. Really worrying, really deceptive packaging as well, isn't it? Okay, Tulip, many thanks for coming in, and thanks for bringing those in for us to look at as well. Now, day 5 of the Winter Olympics in Sochi got off to an extraordinary start earlier, with the first gold medal of the morning being shared between 2 competitors in the women's downhill skiing. The first time a gold's been shared in the history of the Winter Games. Well, Switzerland's Dominique Gizin and Slovenia's Tina Malza got exactly the same time, 1 minute 41.57 seconds. The joint victory gave Switzerland their first win in the downhill for 20 years and Slovenia's first ever gold medal at a Winter Olympics.